You know how we sometimes hear that phrase, no pain, no gain?
Hmm. Usually about exercise, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
But that idea, it's actually popping up more and more in education now.
Ah, okay. Interesting.
Yeah, focusing on something called desirable difficulties in learning. And, well, that's what we're going to dig into today.
Sounds good.
We've got some really interesting research here, especially looking at this framework they call Start and Stick to Desirable Difficulties. S2D2 for short.
S2D2.
Yeah.
Okay. And what's fascinating at this whole concept is how it kind of flips our usual idea of learning on its head.
How so?
Well, we often think, if something feels easy, clicks right away, then we've really got it.
Right. Smooth sailing means good learning.
Yeah, but this research, it suggests that actually when learning feels a bit tough, when we have to sort of wrestle with it mentally, that's often when the learning sticks better. It becomes more durable, more transferable later on.
Exactly. But here's the tricky part, isn't it?
Huh.
We tend to naturally pull back from that effort.
Mm-hmm. Like easy.
We do. We're drawn to the methods that feel smoother, less taxing in the moment, even if they aren't the best for long-term retention.
So that's the challenge. Understanding why the struggle helps, but also why we avoid it.
Precisely. So our goal, our mission for this deep dive is to really unpack this whole desirable difficulties thing for you, the listener. We want to help you spot these beneficial challenges and, maybe more importantly, figure out how to actually stick with them to, level up your learning.
Yeah, looking at that interplay between how effort feels and how much you're actually learning, because they're not always the same thing.
Not at all.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's maybe get a bit more formal. What exactly are desirable difficulties according to this research?
Okay, so the definition they use is basically learning conditions that are challenging, but like appropriately challenged.
Right, not impossible.
Not impossible, exactly. They demand effort, but they don't push you over the edge into being totally overwhelmed. The crucial bit, though, is that these difficulties lead to high actual learning, real understanding, and the ability to apply that knowledge in new situations,
Okay.
even if subjectively you experience it as pretty effortful.
Ah, okay, and that's the really counterintuitive part, right?
Yeah,
The research points out that we often misread that feeling of effort.
totally. Because the benefits might not be immediate, or just because it feels hard, we tend to think, oh, this isn't working very well.
Yeah, I'm struggling, so I must not be learning much.
Exactly. So you get this low perceived learning, even when the actual learning is, well, quite effective deep down.
That mismatch is fascinating. Do they give examples to make it more concrete?
Oh, yeah, definitely. They provide some great examples. Take interleaving.
Okay, and earlier.
So instead of studying one topic really intensely, like blocking it, doing all your history revision, then all your math
Right,
problems.
focusing on one thing at a time.
Yeah, the usual way. Interleaving means you mix them up. You do a bit of history, then a math problem, then maybe back to history or onto physics.
Okay, I can see how that would feel harder. Your brain has to keep switching gears.
Exactly. It feels less smooth, less focused, maybe, but the learning is often deeper.
Hmm, what else?
Another big one is retrieval practice.
Testing yourself, basically.
Yes, actively trying to pull information out of your memory rather than just passively rereading your notes or the textbook chapter.
That definitely feels like more work than just scanning the page again.
It is, but the evidence is really strong on this one. That active retrieval, that pulling out, strengthens the memory trace way more effectively long term than just restudying.
And isn't it kind of ironic? I think the research even learners often prefer restudying.
They do.
Yeah.
Because restudying gives you that immediate feeling of familiarity, that sense of, oh yeah, I know this.
Right, that fluency feels good.
It does. But it can be deceptive. The testing, even though it feels harder and maybe reveals what you don't know, leads to much better long-term recall. It really highlights that gap between the feeling of learning and the actual learning.
Wow. Okay, any other examples?
Yeah, they mentioned varying the context of practice. So if you're learning a skill, say a tennis serve, practice it on different courts, in different weather, not just the same conditions over and over.
Makes it harder but more adaptable.
Precisely. Spaced learning is another one.
Right, revisiting material over time instead of cramming.
Yeah, leaving gaps between study sessions for the same topic feels less productive maybe than one massive cram session, but again, much better for long-term memory. And one more.
Self-explanation.
Explaining it to yourself.
Yeah, as you're learning something, actively trying to explain the concepts of the steps in your own words forces you to process it more deeply.
These are great examples. They all seem to involve, like you said, more mental effort, a bit more cognitive strain.
That's the common thread.
Yeah.
That mental workout is beneficial. But as we kind of touched on, our default mode isn't always to embrace that workout, is it?
No, not usually.
Okay.
The research really hammers this home. Even when people know about these strategies, like they've been told interleaving is good or retrieval practice works,
Uh-huh.
they're often still reluctant to use them. Why? Because they require more perceived effort. And people tend to underestimate just how much better the learning outcome will be.
So we see the effort, but we don't fully appreciate the payoff.
Pretty much. And that leads us right into the core of this research paper, the S2D2 framework. Start and stick to desirable difficulties.
Right. The framework designed to help us understand how we manage our effort in these tricky situations.
Exactly. It aims to help us figure out how we can regulate ourselves to not just start using these effective, harder strategies, but also how to persist with them when they feel tough. It builds on an earlier model, the Effort Monitoring and Regulation Model, or EMR.
Okay, so S2D2 is about managing that relationship between the effort we put in, or think we're putting in, and the learning we get out.
Yeah, particularly when those desirable difficulties are involved. And a huge part of this framework is understanding the roles of perceived effort and perceived learning.
Let's break those down. Perceived effort. That's just how hard something feels.
Essentially, yes. But it's more nuanced. Effort regulation is the conscious choice we make. Am I going to invest mental energy here or stop?
Okay.
Perceived effort, though, isn't just an objective measure of task difficulty. It's our subjective experience of the effort involved. It's a kind of metacognitive judgment.
Metacognitive. Thinking about our own thinking.
Right. And this feeling, this perceived effort, it's influenced by a whole bunch of things. Our beliefs about effort, like is effort good or bad, our past experiences, how tired we are, how interested we are, and importantly, how smoothly the information seems to be processing that fluency thing we mentioned.
So it's not just about how much horsepower the brain is actually using.
No. And the research stresses that these perceptions can be biased. They don't always line up perfectly with the actual cognitive load.
That makes sense. Something can feel easy, but we're actually processing a lot.
Yeah.
Or vice versa.
Exactly. And then you have perceived learning.
Which is how much we think we're learning.
Right. Our own judgment about our current level of understanding. It could be, judging how well we've learned something right after studying it, predicting how we'll do on a future test, or just that general feeling of knowing or not knowing the material.
Okay, so the S2D2 framework is really zooming in on how these three things interact.
Yeah.
How hard we think it is, how much we think we're learning, and whether we actually use these desirable difficulties.
Precisely. And the research maps out three main ways these factors can connect.
Okay, what's the first one?
The first is pretty direct. Perceived effort itself can determine whether we use desirable difficulties. Often, learners see high effort as a cost, something unpleasant to be avoided if possible.
Like a mental tax, yeah. Pay less if you can.
Exactly. And there's this idea of opportunity cost. If doing retrieval practice feels really effortful, we might weigh that effort against doing something easier, like rereading. Even if rereading is less effective, the immediate feeling of effort can loom large.
So the feeling outweighs the potential benefit sometimes.
It can. Research actually shows that how much effort people rate a task as requiring can directly predict if they'll choose a strategy like retrieval practice. Sometimes that perceived effort is a stronger predictor than their perceived learning.
Wow. So we might just avoid it because it feels hard, even if we suspect it might be good for us.
That seems to happen quite a lot, yeah.
Okay, what's the second relationship?
The second one is about the intricate link between perceived effort and perceived learning. They're often related. Interestingly, there's often a negative correlation found.
Negative. So high effort means low perceived learning.
Often, yes. Learners tend to operate on this heuristic, this kind of mental shortcut. If it feels hard, I must not be learning it well. If it feels easy, I must be getting it. The easily learned, easily remembered idea.
Oh, I definitely recognize that feeling. If I'm struggling, I think, this isn't working.
Right. And that feeling can be strongly influenced by processing fluency. When information flows smoothly, feels easy to grasp, we tend to rate our learning as high and the effort as low. Desirable difficulties, though, they often introduce disfluency. Things don't click instantly. And if we equate fluency with learning, we'll naturally shy away from those disfluent, effortful strategies.
Because the disfluency signals low learning to us.
Exactly. Although it's not always that simple. Sometimes if we get feedback saying we actually learned well,
Yeah.
we might then look back and revise our memory of the effort, thinking, oh, I guess it wasn't that hard after all.
Oh. So success can change how we remember the struggle.
It seems so.
Yeah.
And then there's the flip side, a goal-driven approach.
Okay.
If someone is really focused on achieving a specific learning goal and they're actively monitoring their progress,
Yeah.
that negative link between effort and perceived learning can weaken or even vanish. In that case, high effort might actually be interpreted positively as a sign you're making progress towards the goal. This is hard, which means I'm engaging deeply and moving forward.
Seeing the effort as productive work.
Exactly. But the research suggests this goal-driven view is probably less common than the default easy feels like learning interpretation. They also talk about models where perceived effort affects strategy use both directly and indirectly through its impact on perceived learning. This seems especially true after getting performance feedback or gaining more experience.
So feedback really is key here, isn't it? To help recalibrate those perceptions.
It seems crucial. Okay, so the third relationship.
Yeah, what's the third way they connect?
This is where perceived learning might be the main driver, sometimes without perceived effort really playing a major role.
How does that work?
Well, think about situations where the stakes are incredibly high, like cramming for a make-or-break exam.
Right, the all-nighter.
Yeah. You might be exhausted, it feels incredibly effortful, but the importance of the goal passing the exam overrides the feeling of effort. You're so goal-driven that the perceived effort is almost ignored temporarily. Your focus is purely on maximizing perceived learning however you can.
Okay, so high importance can trump high effort perception.
It seems it can for a while, but on the other hand, sometimes perceived effort isn't the issue, but perceived learning is low, and that stops us.
Give me an example.
Well, retrieval practice again. The main benefits often show up later on delayed tests. So right after doing it, you might not feel like you learned much more than if you just reread.
The immediate feedback isn't there.
Exactly. So your perceived learning might be low. And because of that low perceived learning, you might decide, well, this testing thing isn't really working for me, and abandon it, even if it didn't feel particularly effortful in that moment.
Got it. So if we don't see the immediate payoff in terms of feeling like we learned, we might quit.
That can definitely happen.
Okay, this is really painting a picture of why sticking with these beneficial strategies is so hard. So, given all this, how do we actually get better at this? How do we manage our effort, perception, and regulation to actually use these desirable difficulties?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question, right? The research suggests we need to help learners appreciate the actual value of the effort involved and nudge them towards that more goal-driven interpretation we talked about.
Okay, Tom.
They propose interventions at 3 different levels to help learners either accept the effort, reduce the feeling of effort, or even sort of silence it temporarily.
3 levels. What's the first?
First is the strategy level. This is mainly about just getting started. It's basically about education.
Teaching people about desirable difficulties.
Yeah, explaining what they are, why they work, and correcting common misconceptions about learning, like that fluency always equals learning. Just understanding the rationale behind interleaving or retrieval practice can be a powerful first step.
So, knowledge is power.
Yeah.
Literally here.
It can be. They mention specific learning strategy training programs like Study Smart or KBCP that try to do this. But they also stress, really importantly, that teacher training is vital. Teachers need to get it first before they can effectively teach it.
Makes sense. Okay, that's the strategy level for getting started. What about sticking with it when it feels tough?
That's where the next 2 levels come in, the task level and the learner level.
Okay, test level first. What does that involve?
This is about adjusting the learning tasks or the instructional design itself. The goal is to make the desirable difficulties feel a bit less daunting and, crucially, to help learners see the positive results of their effort.
Making the benefits visible.
Exactly. Providing clear feedback on actual learning outcomes is key. So showing learners, look, you used retrieval practice and your score on the delayed test was significantly higher. That kind of concrete evidence can really help correct those biased perceptions of effort and learning.
Seeing is believing, basically.
Yeah, pretty much. The research mentions studies where performance feedback significantly increased students' choice to use retrieval practice later on. They also talk about potentially rewarding effort or reframing difficulty, telling learners that feeling challenged is actually a sign of productive struggle and growth.
But they need context.
Yeah.
Right. Just saying try harder isn't enough.
Oh, absolutely. These interventions need to be tailored, explained properly, and ideally include reflection. It's not just about changing the task, it's about changing the learner's understanding of the task and their effort.
Okay, that's task level. What about the learner level? What can I do as an individual?
This focuses on equipping learners with self-regulation skills. This includes motivational regulation strategies, ways to keep yourself going when things get tough.
Like what?
Things like positive self-talk, encouraging yourself, or visualizing your future self successfully using the knowledge you're struggling to learn now. Creating study conditions that promote flow, that state of deep engagement where you lose track of time, can also help, as effort perception tends to diminish when you're in flow.
So it's about managing your own mindset and motivation.
Exactly. Becoming more goal-directed and learning to appreciate that high effort can be a good thing, a sign of progress.
Right. Now, you mentioned strategies for reducing or silencing perceived effort too. How does that work?
Yeah, so building on those levels. At the task level, one way is just repeated engagement. The more you use a strategy like interleaving, the more familiar it becomes, and often the less effortful it starts to feel. Practice makes perfect, or at least makes it feel easier.
Okay, familiarity reduces the perceived strain.
Also, breaking down big, effortful tasks into smaller chunks, that classic advice. Segmenting a long study session or a complex project makes it feel less overwhelming up front.
Manageable bites. What about at the learner level for reducing effort?
Well, similar idea, segmenting study sessions yourself, like using the Pomodoro technique, those focus bursts with breaks. Although they note the direct evidence on Pomodoro specifically reducing perceived effort needs more research. Another interesting idea is mentally planning your session beforehand, kind of anticipating the effort involved, which athletes sometimes call teleo-anticipation. Also, studying with others or even digital study partners can sometimes make the effort feel shared or less burdensome.
Makes sense? Like misery loves company, but for studying?
Huh, maybe. And also, using technology to offload some of the organizational burden. Think about flashcard apps that handle the spaced repetition schedule for you. That saves you the mental effort of figuring out when to review what.
Right, the app does the heavy lifting of scheduling.
Exactly. Frees up your cognitive resources for the actual learning. They also mention some slightly trickier things around manipulating time perception.
Like what?
Well, maybe slightly underestimating task duration or interrupting a task when it's really close to finish, the so-called Hemingway effect, which can sometimes boost motivation to jump back in and finish it. Also, sometimes reducing the available time can paradoxically make people more focused and goal-driven, potentially reducing the salience of the effort feeling.
That deadline pressure kicking in.
Right. And finally, there's the idea of silencing effort through sheer importance.
We touched on that, the high-stakes situation.
Yeah, when a task is just so critical, the potential negative outcomes of failing are so great that they can temporarily override the feeling of effort you just push through. But as the researchers caution, that's not really a sustainable, healthy way to learn long term.
Right burnout waiting to happen.
Definitely. Now, there's one more important point they raise.
What's that?
What if someone gets better at monitoring their effort? They understand it more, but they still don't regulate it effectively. They still don't choose the harder, better strategy.
Knowing better, but not doing better.
Exactly. This can happen if maybe they lack the actual skills or knowledge to use the desirable difficulty effectively. Or they just don't have enough time. It highlights why just telling people about strategies isn't enough. You need practice, feedback, integration into actual coursework.
So the implementation support is crucial.
Absolutely. And things like anxiety or choking under pressure can also mess with our ability to regulate effort, even if we know what we should be doing.
So many factors at play.
There really are. So to wrap up that part, the researchers really stress that perceived effort and perceived learning are central to whether we embrace desirable difficulties. And we need more research on effective interventions that hit all three levels: strategy, task, and learner, and crucially, address all three factors simultaneously.
Right.
The perceived effort, the perceived learning, and the actual learning outcome.
It's a complex interplay for sure. Okay, so if we boil this down for the listener, what's the main takeaway here?
I think the key message is, don't always trust that feeling of ease when you're learning. Learning that feels comfortable and effortless might be less effective in the long run than learning that requires a bit more mental sweat.
Right. That struggle can be a sign of deeper processing.
Exactly. But, and this is the big but, you need to be aware of your own perceptions. How hard does this feel? How much do I think I'm learning? Understanding those feelings is the first step towards being able to choose and stick with the strategies that, while maybe feeling harder, will actually pay off more down the line.
It's about becoming more metacognitively aware, really,
Yes.
understanding your own learning process.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Okay, great. So as we finish up, maybe a final thought for people to chew on.
Yeah, here's something to reflect on. Think back to a time you learned something that felt really genuinely difficult, maybe frustrating even. But looking back now, you realize you learned it incredibly well and it really stuck with you.
Uh-huh.
Does that experience resonate with what we've been talking about? Did that initial feeling of difficulty match the final learning outcome? And maybe think about going forward, how could you intentionally sprinkle some of these desirable difficulties into your own learning?
Like choosing to quiz yourself instead of just rereading.
Exactly. Or mixing up practice problems instead of doing all the easy ones first. Just experimenting a bit, maybe with one technique, and seeing how it feels, and more importantly, how it affects what you actually remember and can do later on. It's about finding that sweet spot of challenge that works for you.